Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling one of history's most famous labels, and we're going to ask a pretty radical question. What if the Vikings never really existed?
I mean, the image of the Viking is just so powerful, right? It's deeply embedded in our popular culture. You think of long ships, you think of horned helmets, which, by the way, are completely made up, and you think of this single, ferocious people sweeping out of the north.
Okay, but what if I told you that a lot of historians now argue that this entire category, the Vikings, is a modern invention, one that actually obscures more than it reveals? Yeah, let's dive into this. All right, so first things first, we have to separate this popular idea of the Viking from what the historical evidence actually tells us. Because this image we have, it's been built up for centuries, and you gotta admit, it's pretty compelling. And this quote, it just nails the dual personality we've kind of projected onto them. As Sarah Croy notes in her review, we've got this mix of the fearsome, barbaric warrior and the fearless, noble explorer. It makes for a great story, but it also creates a picture that's, well, potentially really misleading. So the core of the argument really begins with the word itself. To deconstruct this whole misleading label, you've got to go back to the source. See, in the medieval sources, the word Vikinger didn't describe a person or a people. It described an activity. It was a job description. To go a Viking just meant to go pirating or raiding. It's something you did, not who you were. So technically anyone could do it, no matter where they were from. And this is the crucial point right here. The idea of the Vikings, with a capital T as a proper noun for an entire ethnic group, that's a really recent development. We're talking it only really dominated historical discussions since the 1970s. We basically took a job title and blew it up into this huge pseudo-ethnographic label. And that's the big problem. This modern label just bundles everybody, kings, armies, farmers, kids, merchants, colonists, into one super simplistic category. As historian Alex Wolff argues, it lumps everyone from these Scandinavian-speaking communities into one box, and in doing so, it just erases the huge variety in their lives and cultures. I mean, think about it. A farmer in Denmark and a merchant on a river in Eastern Europe, totally different worlds. So let's move on to the timeline, because it's not just the label that's a problem. The so-called Viking Age has its own issues. Its whole foundation is kind of shaky. You know, we're often taught that the Viking Age is this neat little package, bookended by these two specific events that happened in England, the raid on Lindisfarne in 793 and the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066. But as Wolff points out, this timeline is really problematic. And here's why. It's based entirely on English history, not Scandinavian history. It's an Anglo-centric view that tells us way more about England's story than it does about what was actually going on back in Scandinavia. And this Anglo-centric view, it just completely ignores long-term developments happening within Scandinavia. For instance, archaeologically, it makes no sense. Sites in Norway show continuity from way, way earlier. And it ignores huge trade hubs like Ribe, which was already buzzing with activity a whole century before Lindisfarne. A more Scandinavia-centric period might be something like 800 to 970, defined not by English battles, but by the flow of Islamic silver. That tells a very different story. Okay, so what happens when we look at the hard scientific evidence? Let's take a look at a case study from Orkney. So a study led by Alexander Johnson did something pretty amazing. They analyzed the remains of 292 individuals from this period. And by looking at the isotopes in their bones, they could figure out what they ate and if they were local or had moved there. It's a way to understand the changes in diet and mobility during this big transition. And what they found, well, it brilliantly illustrates the complexity here. The data doesn't show this simple story of one group, the Picts, being totally replaced by another, the Vikings. No way. Instead, what it reveals is a super dynamic, mobile, and mixed population. You see dietary differences, you see a gradual shift towards eating more seafood over time. It points to a complex process of cultural exchange, not just a simple conquest. This kind of evidence really pushes us towards a completely new way of seeing this period. It all starts to click. The scholar Sarah Croy explains this perfectly. We can move from an ethnic model, which is all about what this one group, the Vikings, did, to a processual model. And that model looks at the era as a period of intense maritime connection and social change that involved lots of different peoples all across Northern Europe. It's about the processes, not just one supposed group.
Because a single label, it just can't contain the sheer diversity of what was going on. Think about it. The experiences of Danish armies in England were worlds apart from the Norwegian settlers creating a totally unique farmer republic in Iceland. And then you have Swedish and Gotlandic traders on the river routes of Eastern Europe, or the complex stuff happening in the Baltic Sea. A single label just flattens all of that.
So why does all this matter? Well, the big takeaway is that by ditching this simplistic label, we don't lose history. We actually gain a much more accurate, complex, and interconnected early medieval world. We get a richer, more truthful understanding of this fascinating past. And really, it leaves us with a bigger question to chew on. How do the labels we use, any labels, shape how we understand the past? It's something we're thinking about, not just for this period, but really for all of history.